In this video, we're going to be talking about particles. And there's two things I want you to be able to do by the end of this video. First thing, I want you to be able to explain what particles are. Thing number two is I want you to be able to give examples of particles. Okay, so let's start with the definition of particles. A particle is, let me turn on my pointer, particles are smaller parts of a whole. Okay, so let me go into detail about what that means. Particles make up a whole substance. So let's start with the big substance. Let's start with think about a pile of flour, a pile of salt, a pile of sand, a rock. Those are all these substances. They're considered what we talk about here as the whole. Okay, so if we took a grain of sand or grain of salt or chipped off a piece of the rock and we took that little piece, that grain or that piece of rock we had, what we'd have in our fingers is a particle of the rock or a particle of flour, a particle of salt or sand or whatever we took the smaller part of. Okay, that is a particle. It is a smaller part of the whole. So taking a grain of flour, that piece of flour is a particle of flour. All right, so particle is a smaller part that makes up a whole. Okay, now the tricky part here is I want you guys to get that a particle has to be made of the same stuff as the whole. Okay, it cannot be different to the whole. So what I mean by that is you can't take a part of something away and that thing is different. That's a terrible way to say it. Think about it this way, okay? Let's say you're making bread, and in the bread you put salt, you put some sugar, you put a flour, you put water, you put oil, you put yeast, and you mix it all together. If you took a grain of flour out of that bread mix, would you have a particle of bread? No, you would have a particle of flour. If you took a grain of salt out, would you have a particle of bread? No, you would have a particle of salt. Okay, now let's say you bake that bread and then you took a crumb of bread out. That crumb, would you have a particle of bread? Yes. Now, let me explain why. The particle has to be made of the same stuff as the whole. Salt is just one of the ingredients in bread. Flour is just one of the ingredients in bread. Okay, if you take it out, you're not taking out bread, you're taking out one of the ingredients, one of the parts inside of it, one of the pieces that make it up. But when you take a crumb off bread, that small little piece is entirely bread. It's made up of everything that bread is made up of. Okay, so a particle is a smaller part of the whole, but it has to have everything in it that the whole has in it. It cannot just be a purely salt and then the rest of it is bread. You need to have all the ingredients of bread in the particle that you have in the whole. Okay, so another way to think of that is we're going to talk a bit sciencey about chemicals here, but you all know that water is made out of H2O, which is hydrogen and oxygen. If I just took hydrogen out of a whole lot of water, I wouldn't have a molecule, a particle of water. I would have hydrogen, which isn't water. Okay? I just want you to get that the particle has to have all the same substances as the whole. Okay? Let's talk about some examples. Here we have salt. If we zoom in, we get these individual grains of salt over here. That's what a grain of salt looks like when you zoom in or magnify it a lot. If we went even more into one of those grains, we would see the smaller parts of those grains look like this. There are a whole lot of those small pieces come together, and that's what makes them look like these squares here. That right there, that would also be considered a particle of salt because it has the same stuff that makes up that makes up that. So it is a particle. If we went even further, we'd get to these things. Now, these are what they're representing atoms here, an atom of sodium and an atom of chlorine. Okay, sodium chloride, that's the fancy scientific name for salt. Okay, each one of these has the exact same stuff that the big pile of salt has in it. So these are the smallest particles of salt we can get. Now, if we cut it in half and we only had chlorine, then that wouldn't be salt. That would be a part of the salt, the ingredient to salt, and that's not a particle. All right, another example. Here's an aluminium foil. We zoom in, that's what it looks like. If we zoom in even further, we can see these little balls. Those are particles, okay? Those are particles of aluminium, okay? So each one of those is made up of pure aluminium. So when you put them together, we can make aluminium foil. Now, hopefully by the end of this, you can explain what a particle is and you can give me examples of them. So